47 minutes.
You know I had no choice, right, Anders?
Geller said as Anna's limp body floated freely through the ISS. Her neck bruised blue from strangulation. Anders slowly nodded, gripping his seat, knuckles white.
She was one of them.
He continued as splatters of blood collided with the walls, spreading across the chambers.
I've known it for quite some time now. I had to wait until now when communications were down. You must understand.
I do, buddy. I do.
Anders replied, his voice cracking. He fought against the tears as regret mixed in with terror. He was too much of a coward to try and stop him.
You did the right thing.
He continued, backed up against the wall.
She was one of them.
You think I'm crazy, don't you?
Geller said, his eyes dark.
You don't believe me.
46 minutes. 35 minutes.
Geller had been desperately searching for something, flinging debris in zero orbit. All the while, Anders remained transfixed in fear, cursing his lack of courage. He knew that his best friend had been slowly becoming unstable in their isolation. But what he had attributed to simple cabin fever had turned out to be full-blown insanity. Geller came back with a long screwdriver, pushing himself towards the body.
I'll show you.
He said, eyes wild.
I know you don't believe me, but I'll show you.
He immediately drove it into her belly and ripped it open with effort. Viscera floated from her striking body as he rummaged inside of her, pulling organs apart as if she were nothing more than meat. Anders fought the urge to be sick. A task he soon failed. The chamber soon resembled a cavity from hell.
34 minutes. 26 minutes.
It can't be.
Geller said almost to himself.
I know I'm right. She was one of them. It had to be her.
Anders still did not know what them were, but he was too scared to reveal the truth. He was still retching, his body splattered with sickened blood.
How could you know for sure?
Anders asked, as cautiously as he could.
It had to be her.
Geller repeated immediately.
Because if it wasn't, then that only leaves one person.
There was half a second of silence while his eyes trailed from Anders towards the screwdriver. Anders followed his gaze, and they simultaneously went for it. They slammed into each other, the momentum throwing them against the wall. They wrestled for it, both desperately clawing for the weapon in zero gravity. Geller managed to snatch it from Anders' grip and drove it into his shoulder, chipping his bone. Anders cried out in pain and headbutt Geller before he could rip it out of him. This left Geller dazed, and Anders pulled the screwdriver from his shoulder and slammed the handle into Geller's temple. Again and again. The light from his eyes soon snuffed out, and his head drooped forward.
25 minutes. 13 minutes.
Anders saw that Geller had finally regained consciousness. He had strapped him into his sleeping spot, tied there with whatever materials he could find.
I saw a body floating out of the ISS, Anders.
Geller said. His voice slurred.
I knew it then and I know it now.
You've gone mad.
Anders replied as he bandaged his shoulder.
I'm gonna get you the help you need.
Geller laughed bitterly, blinking and momentarily losing consciousness. He forced himself awake again with effort.
You can't help me. You can't help any of us.
He said. Anders zipped up Anna's corpse in her sleeping bag, having done his best to put her back together. He retched again, but only bile remained.
12 minutes. 2 minutes.
Anders readied himself at the comm station, shaking uncontrollably. He was dreading the call. He knew that speaking it would make it true, as it had all just seemed like a bad nightmare before.
Anders?
Geller said, regaining consciousness once again, his head lolling to the side as he fought against the restraints. Anders did his best to ignore him as the sounds of his struggling became louder. Something was tearing.
Anders.
He said again, more urgently this time.
What?
Anders shouted in anger, looking back towards Gilla. Anna's butchered corpse was floating over him, her hand over his mouth, his eyes wide open. She clamped it shut, bits of teeth and bone shattering against the force. Her head turned back to Anders, neck twisting at a 180-degree angle.
1 minute. Status check. ISS. Everything okay there?
Negative.
Came the reply, the voice quivering.
They've killed each other. Anders and Geller are both dead.